June 2019, hundreds of thousands of protesters filled the streets of Hong Kong, demanding the withdrawal of a bill to allow the extradition of criminal suspects to mainland China. The law was eventually abandoned, but the pro-democracy protests continued. 1 year later, the coronavirus pandemic has largely silenced the streets. In May, Beijing approved a national security bill that critics say would end Hong Kong's political freedoms. The territory's chief executive, an appointment approved by China's central government, welcomed the proposed law.
The people of Hong Kong want to see stability again.
Britain says the bill represents a clear breach of the Sino-British Joint Declaration, signed when it handed over the territory to China in 1997.
We've made a historic commitment to the people of Hong Kong to protect their autonomy and to protect their freedoms, and more importantly, so has China.
Now it seems Britain may offer an emergency exit. Britain issued so-called British nationals overseas passports to Hong Kong residents before the handover. The government says around 350,000 people currently hold such a passport, and 2.5 million people are eligible to apply. The British government is proposing to make it easier for holders of those passports and their immediate family to move to Britain, with what it calls a clear pathway to citizenship after 5 years.
Implicit in the British plan is the possibility that Hong Kong could lose a very significant percentage of its talented people. From the perspective of Beijing, they want Hong Kongers to do well. They are not, however, prepared to pay any price to keep their talents in place in Hong Kong, particularly if those talents also happens to be, in quotation marks, troublemakers for Beijing.
Until the legislation is passed, British ministers have proposed emergency measures to allow BNO passport holders easier entry rights into Britain. It's the biggest change in policy since the handover, says Johnny Patterson of the advocacy group Hong Kong Watch.
It's a really significant watershed, and it signals not only an incredibly generous and meaningful immigration shift, but also a sea change in Sino-British relations, potentially.
But there is a lack of policy detail, argues Professor Steve Sang.
I think the ambiguity is very much by design. What the British government has offered Hong Kong essentially is to send a message both to people in Hong Kong that they are not forgotten, and a message to China that there will be responses from the UK. Hopefully the Chinese government will back off.
But Beijing warns that the British citizenship offer would itself breach the 1997 Joint Declaration. Until recently, Britain agreed with that verdict. But China's attempt to impose the new security law on Hong Kong has changed the calculation in London.